This is a guy that knows the program, player for 4 years, an assistant next to Jim Boeheim on the bench for 15. He did everything you could do in Syracuse basketball except be the head coach and maybe be the water boy. Great player, championship player, played on the 03 title team. Was a guy that was depended on for scoring, was a leader, was a captain. Then he was a graduate assistant. Then he was an assistant coach. So he knows all the nooks and crannies of that program. He probably knows where the weaknesses are, things that need to be improved, things that should be improved. And he's going to easily be accepted by the Syracuse community. There will be no need for the coach. When you have a new coach press conference, you want that guy to win the press conference, right? Gerry McNamara is not going to have to do that. He's not going to have to be a guy that impresses the community, wins over the boosters, wows the fan base. Gerry McNamara's got all of that every time he rolls into Syracuse, no matter what his job is. So he is starting 3 steps ahead than most new college basketball coaches would be. Now, he's not just getting the job either because he has all that stored up goodwill from his experience as a player in Syracuse. He did a damn good job at Siena. He took a program that 2 years ago won 4 games and not only had them in the NCAA tournament this year, they had number 1 Duke on the ropes for most of the second half. There's a sequence in the middle of the second half when Siena's up 11 in the second half where they miss a dunk and the ball rebounds so far that it essentially starts a Duke fast break and the Blue Devils dunk it at the other end. That game could have been Siena by 13 in total control if not were a missed dunk. Now, look, I still think Duke probably wins the game one way or the other. But Gerry McNamara did work at Siena and did it fast. 2 years from 4 wins to having the most legendary program in the country on the ropes is really quick turnaround. I mean, that's the kind of thing that gets you noticed. That's the kind of thing, you know what it does? It gets you a job at a big university is what it does. And that's what it's done for Gerry McNamara. Now, I know there were a number of Syracuse fans, alum, etc., who were not super happy about the McNamara hire for a number of reasons. I think the two main ones are, number one, why are we staying in program? Why are we hiring another Syracuse guy? It didn't work out very well for Adrian Autry, did it? Why is it going to be better for Gerry McNamara? And then the other one is, the guy's had 2 years as a head coach. Is that enough to be running a program like Syracuse? And I think they're both, certainly to an extent, viable reasons to be skeptical. But I don't really buy either one too much. Let's examine the credentials part of it. Because inside or outside the program, that's almost a matter of taste at this point. Just because a guy is from Syracuse or played at Syracuse doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be a better or worse coach. I know that there's a feeling that Autry was not a good hire and didn't work out. So let's do something that's not that. And that's generally what you take any sport, any franchise. If something doesn't work out with the coach you just had, you normally go a different way. The Bills had more of a disciplinarian, old school guy with Sean McDermott. They went more player-friendly, younger guy, new age, new look, sports science committed guy with Joe Brady. This is not that much different. So even if Gerry McNamara is from the program, I don't think it's necessarily the wrong move, even if there is kind of a knee-jerk feeling that you got to do something different this time around. And I think if you say, I only want somebody from outside the program, well, then you're limiting yourself from being able to get a guy like Gerry McNamara, who may very well be one of the next great coaches on the ascent. So I don't think it makes sense to just say hard and fast, outside the program, inside the program. You want to get the best guy, right? So is Gerry McNamara the best guy? Well, let's look at some of the other coaches. Because I went through and checked out who's been hired, who's kind of on the short list for jobs that are open right now, and compare to what Gerry McNamara is. Let's start with Brian Hodgson, the former UB assistant who went to Providence. And this was a guy who was heavily rumored to be in contention for the Syracuse job. Well, Hodgson is coming from 2 years as a head coach at Arkansas State and 1 year at South Florida. So he has exactly one more year of head coaching experience than Gerry McNamara does. And remember, Gerry McNamara's got 15 years as an assistant in some form to Jim Boeheim on the resume, which is pretty comparable to what most other new head coaches have. So when it comes to head coaching experience, the guy who was pretty much the road not taken for Syracuse has one more year of experience. And by the way, Brian Hodgson going 2 years at one school and then 1 year at South Florida and then going to Providence right after that, does that not sound a little skeevy? Does that not sound like the guy who's going to be committed to you? Does that not sound like a guy who is going to run to the next program the moment he thinks he can improve his salary or standing or even recruiting ability in the slightest? So right off the bat, choice B for Syracuse, to me, doesn't sound anywhere close to as enticing as Gerry McNamara. Let's go beyond that. Georgia Tech, the guy that they're rumored to maybe have already hired, Scott Cross. He had one college other job as a head coach at Troy. He was there for 7 years. Cincinnati looking for a coach. Among their candidates, Jared Calhoun, 7 years at Youngstown State, 2 years at Utah State. So he had two jobs, and he had many more years than Gerry McNamara, but he never went to the NCAA tournament at Youngstown State. So if you're not taking a mid-major to the tournament, you can pretty much scratch yourself off any list of going to a major program. Why is Jared Calhoun in contention for the Cincinnati job? Because he went to the tournament with Utah State the last 2 years. Not a hard formula. Arizona State still looking for a coach. Okay, they got a number of candidates. Among them, Randy Bennett is one of them. Now, he's been at St. Mary's for 25 years. Like Gerry McNamara, he's had only one other job. He's been there for like 2.5 decades, but one job. One of the reasons Randy Bennett, I think, is in contention is because he's originally from Arizona. So that's kind of sort of a hometown thing for him. Eric Olson is another candidate for the Arizona State job. He coached at UC San Diego for 12 years, just went to New Mexico last year. So a more experienced candidate for sure. How about let's go back to the ACC. Boston College is looking for a coach. Among the guys rumored to be in contention for their job, John Becker, who's been at Vermont forever, same as Randy Bennett. 15 years of Vermont, they've been in the tournament over and over and over. Joe Gallo is another candidate for the BC job. He's at Merrimack right now. And to be honest, I didn't realize Merrimack was a Division I program until I looked this up. The reason for that is when Joe Gallo got to Merrimack 10 years ago, it was a D2 program. So technically, Joe Gallo, all right, let me put it this way. Gerry McNamara has something on his resume Joe Gallo doesn't. Gerry McNamara has already landed a job at a Division I school, and Joe Gallo is on the short list for a team that's going to play in Syracuse's conference. And then there's another candidate named Eric Conkle who's had 7 years at Louisiana Tech and 3 years at Tulsa. So you go through this list, and yes, most of these guys have more experience than Gerry McNamara. A couple of these guys are long time mid-major, mid-ish major coaches with impeccable resumes. But most of these guys are about the same as Gerry McNamara. In other words, they went to a mid-major, they made the program better, they took them to a tournament. I mean, that's really the qualification for getting a coach at a major job right now. So Gerry McNamara is right in the same category. If you're making a list of like coaches who are qualified, who you think would have enough on their resume to be the new Syracuse head coach, Gerry McNamara is in the same ballpark with these guys. He might be on first base where some of these guys are on second or third, but he's in the ballpark. And I don't think it's ridiculous to think that McNamara is comparable to these group of coaches who are on the short lists of various power schools to be the new basketball head coach. So I don't think Gerry McNamara's resume is that far behind all the rest of these guys. And the other part of it is, too, if you're going to attract someone, you think about a couple of names on this list. Randy Bennett, who's been at St. Mary's for 25 years, great program. John Becker at Vermont, been there for 15 years, great program. Both those schools go to tournament after tournament, conference championship after conference championship. Those guys are going to have their choice of where they want to go. And I think they've kind of, in a number of ways, already shown you what their choice is going to be. They want to stay where they are. But again, the point is, they're not going to jump at the first Division I school or the first power school that pops up on their agent's radar. Is Syracuse going to be able to attract a guy like that? I think SU fans and the university has to be pretty honest about that. What is Syracuse right now? What is attractive about Syracuse? Yep, they play in the ACC. That's a good one. The dome is fantastic. What a cool arena. I've been to a couple other of the major conference arenas. Kansas is cool, but it's intimate. Cameron Indoor for Duke. People have always talked about that one being, it's cool, but it's really tiny. There are very few Division I universities who have a home arena for basketball that compares to the Carrier Dome. So very much a check in Syracuse's favor. But this is now a team that's not been to the dance for nearly a decade. Kids that are being recruited to Syracuse today were in elementary school the last time Syracuse went to an NCAA tournament. And Syracuse still plays in Syracuse, which if you're looking at some of these other places that have jobs right now, Arizona State, Boston College, Georgia Tech, there are much better cities to live in if you're a coach than Syracuse University. And now look, I can sit here and lay out the pros and cons for all these jobs and all these coaches. At the end of the day, in this day and age of college basketball, the only thing that's going to matter for whether Syracuse is successful or not, and probably not even which coach they hire is higher than this on the list, it's how much NIL money they're going to spend. So yeah, we could argue about whether it should have been Gerry McNamara or Brian Hodgson or somebody else. But if Syracuse is not going to lay out the resources to keep their program competitive, then it won't be competitive. So if Gerry McNamara is going to work, same as any other coach, it's going to have to include a commitment. And now Syracuse has said reportedly that they are going to make sure their NIL commitment is in the upper third of the ACC. Upper third is not exactly knocking your socks off with a commitment, but it is a pretty solid one. If you can say that, what is there, like 15 or 16 teams in the ACC right now? If you can say that it's like Duke, Louisville, North Carolina, and Syracuse, I think you feel okay about that in general. Now we'll see if that actually comes to be, if that's actually the commitment that Syracuse makes. But Gerry McNamara, I think, is a really smart hire. And yes, he's inside the program, so he knows the program. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think Syracuse, people looked at Gerry McNamara, and I think some of the skeptics have done it this way, and I pointed this out on my X feed over the weekend. I think there are a number of Syracuse people that looked at the Gerry McNamara hire and said the school went with somebody underqualified just because he went there. And I think the real answer is Syracuse was able to land someone they might not have been able to get because he went to school there. Syracuse is no longer the plum job it might have been 10 years ago. In part, I think, because Jim Boeheim probably stayed on a few years too long. I think we all saw it. You understand why he wants to coach his kids. Who wouldn't? He certainly had earned the right to do that. But I think it would have been better for the program if he had stepped aside 3 or 4 years earlier so the next coach could still capitalize on the aura that was Syracuse basketball. That's now gone, especially now that you're 3 years in an entire new administration in a number of ways, not just with the basketball program, but certainly new athletic director, et cetera. You are a couple of levels removed from when Syracuse basketball is great. It can still be great again, but you're not too far off if you're Syracuse from any other power school X. In other words, to make Syracuse great, you need to find a good coach, you need to have an excellent NIL commitment, and then you need to hit on some recruits. I think that's probably the formula, the top 3 steps for it at least, of any program in the country. You could be talking about Maryland, you could be talking about Arizona State, you could be talking about Georgia Tech. Syracuse is right there. Back in the day, when Syracuse in its heyday in the Big East, Syracuse and Georgetown were premier programs. Georgetown's not premier anymore. I don't think Syracuse is quite to Georgetown's level. They've had more recent success, but they're pretty damn close. Being Syracuse does not land you the best coaches in the country. And they never really had to test this formula because Jim Boeheim was great. Jim Boeheim, I put it this way, Jim Boeheim was there before Syracuse was great, and he was still there after they had started to fall off. So now Syracuse is pretty much any other program. Not quite. That dome helps, and being in the ACC helps, and there still is some aura of multiple Final Fours in this century. But Syracuse is fighting pretty much the same battle that you're fighting if you're Wake Forest, that you're fighting if you are Michigan. Now they're number one school. Bad choice. If you are, how many bad schools are there in the Big Ten right now? Not many. If you're Rutgers, that's what Syracuse is right now. And landing Gerry McNamara, a coach who did fantastic work at his most recent job, his only job, but his most recent job. A guy who certainly has cachet at your university, I think is definitely a win. Will it turn the program back into a ridiculous success? Remains to be seen. And again, a lot of that's going to be driven by how much the school and the boosters will be able to support what McNamara wants to do financially. But for the Syracuse fan that looks at this and says, this is a bad idea because it's just another guy in school, another member of the program. I think if you limit your search to just those guys, you're missing out on what could be one of the next potential great coaches in the country. Gerry McNamara has all the credentials of someone who could really be a superb coach. Are you getting him a little early? Sure. And it's a little risky taking a shot on a guy who's only been there for 2 years. Any coach Syracuse was going to hire was going to come with a risk. And the risk you're taking is that Gerry McNamara, as a X's and O's head coach, is a guy who has built programs, does not have an extensive resume of success. Got a very small resume of success, but he still has a resume of success. And to me, that is enough to base some optimism on. The perfect candidate is probably not going to Syracuse anymore. You got to pick which flaw you're okay with. And for me, taking a coach that you might be getting a little too early is fine. Because think about this. What if Syracuse had passed on Gerry McNamara and decided to go with any of these other candidates that have a few more years of experience? And Gerry McNamara goes to, say, Georgia Tech, Boston College. And it turns out that what he was building at Siena was only the tip of the iceberg. How long would every university official kick themselves? How long would every fan lament the fact that you had a shot at Gerry McNamara on the ground floor and passed it up because he only had 2 years of experience, or because it was another a hire from inside the program? How much would that hurt? How long would that pain last? Because if you turn Gerry McNamara down, if he wants to come there, there's a good chance he doesn't come back. And on the flip side, if this hire doesn't work for Syracuse, if Gerry McNamara is literally just a repeat of Adrian Autry, and I'd be surprised if it went that way, but I guess it's on the table. What are you losing if you're Syracuse? You're damn near the bottom right now. You're almost another run-of-the-mill program in the ACC. How much worse could Gerry McNamara failing make it? If it doesn't work, you move on from him in 3 years, and you're ended up right back where you are now. So I think looking at it that way, the Gerry McNamara hire to me makes all the sense in the world. Doesn't mean it's going to work, but I'm pretty darn optimistic that a coach who knows the program, knows the university, and has shown success, I don't see why that guy could possibly be a problem.